In our last unit, I argued that you have to use participative management, some form of participation, when you want to manage change. That when you want to move from one steady state to another, when you want to make an alteration in the work environment, get the people who are going to be affected by that alteration involved in the process. Now, that seems to make common sense to me, but it's very hard to do. This is a subject that really strikes home with me because as president of a small company, I spend a lot of my time making alterations, trying to improve the way things are done. And there's almost nothing that I do as the president that doesn't impact on someone else. I suppose I could change the pictures around on my office wall and that wouldn't impact on anybody, but even then I'm not so sure. A few years ago, I received a call from Inc. magazine informing me that my company, ODI, was one of their 500 fastest growing corporations in the United States. My first reaction was, that is terrific. Do we get a cup? Is there a plaque that I can put on the wall? And the person who called said, no, but you must get a lot of problems when you grow that fast. Boy, was he right. Whether your company's growing or your organization is shrinking, all managers are constantly finding that they spend most of their time managing change. And yet the frustration is that even when you try to make a small change, sometimes even a change that benefits your employees, you find out that they resist, that people don't appear to be rational all the time in the change process. Why is it that people generally seem to resist change?
So, Sherry, how many copies do you have to do?
Only about 50 issues.
Hi, I'm glad I found you both. This won't take long, but I just found out this morning that some of you will be moving, and it'll take me a few days to figure out who's going to be where.
Well, I was afraid something like this was going to happen.
Hey, it's not a big deal. I mean, the new offices are only 50 feet down the hall. You can see them from here.
What do you mean some of us are going to be moving? Who?
Why?
Why? When?
What are you so excited about? Now, I'll get back to you after the decision's been made. It's no big deal. Now, everyone just get back to work and stop worrying. I mean, it's not like you're being transferred to Alaska, you know.
No, I wonder why he said that. That must be next,
Get back to work? How? How am I ever going to get this report finished on time?
Well, why would he be transferring us to Alaska? We don't even do business there.
Why did those people react that way? Why do they seem so suspicious, so resistant? Were they being irrational? The point is they're afraid. See, change hurts people. At least they think it will hurt. There's a theory in psychology called the theory of psychological advantage. Human beings are always concerned about their own best self-interest. And those people just couldn't figure out what was going to be good for them in the change that management had in mind. Think about all the changes that have been done to you. Think of all the poorly managed change, and think of your own personal reaction. When management came down and said, do it this way. First of all, change hurts us socially. When you think about it, we work in work teams and groups and people together for years. I remember having a group of executives that I was working with in a seminar for a 2-week period of time. These were all senior managers. And we put them together in work groups. For 6 days, they worked in work groups, 10, 11 hours a day, going over cases and exercises. They got pretty tight with each other. On the 7th day, I brought them all together and said, let's change groups. You've been together for a week, let's break into new groups for the next week. And they all rejected the change. They all refused. They were all senior executives. They were big boys and girls. They could say no, and they did. And I said, well, why are you resisting this simple change? And one of them said, well, it takes too long. And I said, no, it doesn't. It'll take 10 minutes. I'll just break you into new groups. And of course, what we finally got at was it takes too long to figure out who in the next group, the new group, was going to be the leader, the follower, the joker, and so on. They just didn't want to be bothered with that. And I pointed out to them they had been together for 6 days, and they were resisting change. But they would go back to their hospitals and their corporations and their businesses, and they would tell people who had been working together for 6 years, you, go to the 4th floor. And they wonder why someone who's yanked out of a social work group will be saying, but. That kind of change hurts socially. We all have niches in the groups that we work with and the colleagues that we have every day at work. Change is also hurtful psychologically. If you come in with a new level of technology or a new way of doing things that will improve quality and productivity, keep in mind that a lot of people don't know if they can handle that. They haven't been often part of the process of determining what that technology is going to be. So when someone resists change because they look at that technology and wondering what it does, that resistance is rational. People will also resist change because they perceive change to be economically hurtful. That perhaps this new job means if we improve productivity, they're going to be out of a job. Small wonder that people resist change if they think that their own income and their own security is going to be affected. Maslow could have forecasted that a long time ago. It's interesting, though, that most changes in organizational life that improve quality and productivity don't eliminate jobs. They save jobs. They add to the productive output of an enterprise. So when people resist change, remember that it's rational. And what you have to work on are the rational aspects of managing change. Fritz Roethlisberger, a professor who ran the Hawthorne studies, summarized all of our thinking about the management of change into what he called his X chart. What the X chart shows is that it's not the change itself that determines a response to change. It's an attitude about change. And that attitude is composed of the individual and his background, the social environment, the change itself. Lumped all together, that determines how people respond to the change process. What you and I have to work on are the attitudes about change. Remember, change hurts. People are rational. I don't resist self-cleaning ovens or electric pencil sharpeners. I only resist the change that's going to hurt. And that's true of you, and it's true of all the people who work for us. And yet, how do we as managers often go about managing the change process? If you decide tomorrow that you want to improve quality or productivity, how are you going to get your employees to do that? It's almost as if we consider our employees to be some kind of animal, to be, for example, rats. Let's assume that I'm asking you to make rats run from this side of the table to this side of the table. And I want you to make them run better, quicker, and faster than they've ever run before. How are you going to do that? Typically, most managers will get behind the rat to make it run. They'll get behind the rat and beat it. Jump and I'll tell you how high. That used to work in the old days with the old kind of rats. But our rats don't respond to that very well, as many of us have found out. When we try to do that today, what happens is the rats resist. You can make them angry if you manage change without involving them in the process. There are more of them than there are of us. They could turn on us. They could do a number on us. If you keep beating on people to change without any rationale involved, without giving them any sense of participation, you can kill them. They can leave. Our rats, our employees, are very expensive. We have great investments in the people who work for us. Oh no, it's a far better economic exercise to at least get to the head of the rat, to examine things we can offer at the nose of the rat. Traditionally, all we've thought to be able to offer our employees in the change process is cheese. We'll give you a bonus. And we say to our employees or our rats, come on, run a little faster, run a little better, and we'll give you a little more. Come on, a little faster, a little better, we'll give you a little more. Come on, and so on and so on and so on. If you try that with your employees in mind, what happens is, after a while, you run out of cheese and you run out of steam. When the rats don't budge, the typical reaction of management is something is terribly wrong with the rats. You got defective rats. They don't make them like they used to, by gosh. When the fact is, we have done nothing in the change process most of the time to reduce resistance, to co-opt, to bring in, to make them part of the change process, rather than jerk them around by the change. How do you go about reducing resistance to change? It's called unfreezing. A famous social psychologist by the name of Kurt Lewin said that when you want to manage change, the first thing you have to do is unfreeze the old ways, reduce resistance, then make your change, and then refreeze. In this unit, we want to talk about unfreezing and how participative management helps unfreeze resistance to change. For example, one plant manager I know had to open up a new plant. He had to move 2,500 people, a distance of about 12 miles, to a new plant. He spent 6 months preparing, unfreezing his organization to do that. He spent 6 months of interviewing employees in the plant, 6 months of office workers picking out their own colors in their offices within a limited selection, 6 months of people taking bus rides to the new plant site to see where their machines or office or desk was going to go. When he finally wanted to make the change itself, all he said was, change. And 100 people got up and made a left turn and went to the new plant. That didn't just happen. Any fool could say, change. For that, you don't need years of experience. He managed that change. He made it happen. Let me offer you a simple technique that will help you manage change with your work group if you want to improve quality or productivity and move from one state of performance to hopefully a better state of performance. The technique is very simple. It's called force field analysis. In fact, it's deceivingly simple, because all you really have to do to use it is to find a chalkboard or a flip chart or a napkin or a piece of paper, gather your people around that chalkboard or flip chart or paper, and draw a line. The line represents the problem that you want to work on. For example, a hospital administrator that I know that tried this for the first time wanted to work on the problem that he had a 48% turnover rate amongst his nurses. He was losing half of his nurses every year. What he really wanted, of course, ideally, was hardly any turnover rate. Now, most problems are dynamic. They move back and forth along some kind of scale. He could have, in theory, 0 turnover, 50% turnover, or 100% turnover. Why was his problem focused right here in the middle? If you imagine that these problems float back and forth, use your people to come up with the ideas, the forces that are driving it in both directions. For example, when he got his department heads together, 14 people in a room, who had hundreds of years, literally, of management and practical experience in that kind of organization, they had all kinds of ideas of what might be good and what might be bad. What were the positive forces driving the line towards 0? Well, they talked about the fact that their pay scale was very high. Relative to the other hospitals in town, they paid their people pretty well. They had their own nursing school. They came up with a half a dozen positive things that were driving them in the direction they want to go. Well, if all these things were so good, why did they have any turnover rate at all, he wondered. They also came up with a lot of negative things. For example, they pointed out that the location of the hospital wasn't so great. They pointed out that the physical plant of the hospital wasn't that great. They pointed out that there was no training program for brand new nurses who didn't go to the nursing school. They had a half a dozen things that were wrong, some of which they could do something about, some of which they couldn't do something about. So the first real advantage of force field analysis is it gets everybody together. It gives a good excuse for them to focus in on a problem that's of concern to you, the boss. Plus you get some very good ideas. Once they could eliminate the things that they couldn't do anything about, they couldn't move the hospital to a better location. So to heck with that. But what about the things they could do something about? Once they laid it all out, he was then able to delegate. He was able to say to his engineering people, if I could come up with some money from my budget, what can you do to come up with a nurse's lounge? He could talk to the director of nurses and the head of the nursing school and said, what can you do to come up with a better orientation program for our nurses? Come back next week with a budget, a calendar, and an action plan. Work with us. Tell us what you're going to do. And together that management team could reduce a 48% turnover rate down to a 28% turnover rate in less than a year. Together, every week, every time you meet, there's probably a different problem that you want to work on. But force field analysis is a very helpful way of identifying obstacles to change. It gets people involved in the process and allows us to work together on eliminating those obstacles. Now, the degree of participation varies tremendously. When you want to manage change from one state to another, it may involve nothing more than letting people influence a little bit so they have some control over that process, to the other extreme of just letting them handle the whole thing. Letting the monkey that we talked about earlier be their problem. In a classic study about managing change, in a pajama factory, employees were tested in 3 different modes of the change process. In one mode, management wanted to change the way the pajamas were folded because they had a new, more sleek-looking box. So they got a group of workers whose job it was to fold pajamas, and they said, here's the sleek-looking box. We want you to fold the left leg over the right leg, do it this way. And they told the workers to press on. Meanwhile, half the workers didn't show up the next day. Nobody was particularly interested. Quality was awful. In another experimental group, they decided to use a little participation. So they brought a representative from the employees and said, Martha, you tell them to fold the left leg over the right leg and do it this way with a little tissue paper. In that particular group, productivity wasn't bad. The employees did participate. They were there. Quality was all right. But in the third group, as an experiment, management decided to try something else that they never would have done if it wasn't an experiment. They went to a third work group, handed them the new box, tossed it to the group and said, how do you want to fold the pajamas? And they all caucused and they got together and they decided to fold the left leg over the right leg with a little tissue paper and do it this way. Everybody participated, productivity went up, quality and quality control was excellent, simply because it was their problem, their system. The change was controlled. It wasn't something that was done to them. They were part of the process. In this unit, we're going to pause now and give you a chance to practice force field analysis to get people to participate with you in the change process.